Welcome to week 12 of Bible Studies for Life. We're still going here in Genesis, the story of Joseph, and what a great story it is. Now look, we have gone to chapter 42 and then on to chapter 45. We've skipped a huge piece here, right, where Joseph gets sold to Potiphar, gets falsely accused of rape, gets thrown in jail, finally gets out of jail. He ends up in Pharaoh's court. He is second in command to Pharaoh, and miracles that God does in his life to get him there. So that's where we are now. And this part you want to read, there's some of it that we just say is kind of repetitive, where a story gets told and then it gets retold again, but really it helps to kind of pick up on what's happening. There's a great famine that's taking place in Egypt that gets us to where we are today in the lesson. Before we dive into chapter 42, be sure and subscribe to the video if you haven't already. Like, hit the thumbs up, be sure and give me a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. Ask your questions, whatever it is, and we'll be happy to answer those. And then share the video with somebody else. If you want to support our work, you can go to give.exposedtochrist.com and you can support the work we're doing there. Okay, Genesis chapter 42. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. There's been a famine. They're in this. They had 7 years of plenty. Joseph led Pharaoh to store up all the grain. And now Egypt is where everybody's coming that didn't know there was going to be and hadn't prepared for it. And now they're coming to get grain. And finally, Joseph's brothers are coming also. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him. He had Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, kept him home, right? The sons of Israel were among those who came to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So they have come to buy grain, right? This is why they're here, to buy grain. We've got 10 of the brothers, 10 of Joseph's brothers come down. We jump ahead. Joseph has finagled them to get into trouble, okay, with the grain. Then they said to each other, that's the short word, read the chapter. Obviously, we are being punished for what we did to our brother. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this trouble has come to us. Okay. We're years later. We're years after they sold him into slavery, right? Years. And they are still thinking about this. We are being punished for what we did to our brother. That's their first conclusion. The fact that this has happened is because we treated Joseph wrong. They've not forgotten it. Now, I submit this to you. Those brothers never trusted one another after that event. I mean, how could you? What if, if this is what we're willing to do to one of our brothers, what if something happens and the brothers turn against you and now you're the brother who's out of sorts? What are they going to do to you? Because you saw what they did to Joseph, right? They never trusted one another. In essence, they were blackmailing one another. You can't tell what happened because we'll all get in trouble. And if you tell, well, you're going to be in trouble too, right? But I want you to read this next part because this is really key to what understanding really maybe even the previous story, but we ought to think about this, right? We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us. He's in the pit, and he's not just sitting in the pit quiet. They're sitting down having lunch, and he's pleading with them, let me out of here, get me out of here. And they can hear him, and they don't really care, right? We would not listen. He says, this is why this has happened. Now, their guilt remains with them. But Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must account for his blood. They all know, right? They did not realize that Joseph understood them. So they're there, and Joseph knows, he understands. They're speaking in Hebrew. They think he's an Egyptian. He can't understand. Joseph understood them since there was an interpreter between them. He turned away from them and wept. So he spoke to them in Egyptian through the interpreter. They hear this. He hears them speaking, knowing that we're in this trouble. Things are going bad for us because of what we did to Joseph, not knowing that he's there. And Joseph turns from them and he wept. He said, when he turned back and he spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and had him bound before their eyes. He took one of the brothers and had him tied up. Joseph is working this whole thing, right? He's got the brothers who've come to him for grain. And now they get brought before Joseph. And now he's got them, right? And they know, they think we're in trouble. Why are we in trouble? It all goes back to that. Then he takes Simeon, and he has Simeon tied up right before their eyes, right? And we'll go to chapter 45. Okay, so they've gone back and forth. He's planted stuff on them. They've come back. They finally brought the little brother. Joseph, they're sitting down again with Joseph. They still don't know it's Joseph, right? In chapter 45, verse 1, Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all his attendants, so he called out, "Send everyone away from me." No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. So Joseph wants them to know who he is, right? So he decides he's going to tell them. So he sends everybody out, right? He says, everybody leave, right? Except for the brothers. So there's nobody in there. But he's weeping so loudly, he says everybody can hear him weeping, but they can't understand what he's saying, right? They don't know what he's saying. And what he's saying is, "It's me, Joseph. It's me." They couldn't answer him because they were terrified. I bet they were. Because you go back here and they knew, right? And now what's he going to do to us? This is really Joseph. What's he going to do to us? And I'm sure he's speaking in Hebrew to him at that point, right? In their own language. And so everything that they thought they'd kept hid from him, they now know is revealed. And he is Joseph. And now here, goodness, their lives have flipped upside down. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Okay, I said last week Joseph was a bratty teenager. Maybe that's not the exact words, but he was a bratty teenager. And the thing that happened in Joseph's life is that as he was sent to Egypt, he grew up. He was maybe always a person of integrity, and that's one of the clearest things in his life you see. But we also see him growing in his walk with the Lord, and he grows into a man, which our prayer is that all bratty teenagers eventually grow into a man, right? Well, he's grown into a man. And so he calls them near, and they're afraid he's calling us near because he's going to kill us all. And they would think, rightly so, we probably deserve it, right? But he says, and he makes sure that they know that he is exactly who he says he is, right? "I'm Joseph, I'm your brother. I'm the one you sold into Egypt." Nobody else knows that. Nobody else knows that except Joseph. He's making sure they know that he is who he says he is, right? But don't be grieved, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here. He is not denying the sin. He's not saying it's no big deal. He's not saying, you sent me on a vacation. He's not doing that. He's not soft selling it. You sold me into Egypt. Twice he says, you sold me here, right? But he now understands through all of this, and maybe he's just gaining that understanding when his brothers show up, that God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. Okay. So was it God's will that he be sold into slavery? Well, I don't think we would say that, would we? That was a terrible sin that they committed, a sin out of anger and a sin out of jealousy. I don't think we would say that. It wasn't God's will that he be sold into slavery. Was it God's will that he be in Egypt? Yes. Was it God's will that he be in Pharaoh's household running things? Yes. That becomes clear when you read the story of Joseph. But how he got there, well, I don't think we would say that was God's will. That was not the way that it should have been done. So we never say that sin is God's will, but we would say that God can redeem sin, right? And redeeming sin is not just forgiving it. Redeeming sin is taking what happened and bringing great things, good things, things that honor the Lord out of it. Taking that and flipping it around. That which was meant for evil, God meant for good. that God takes that and he brings good out of it. And part of that good is preserving the life of his brothers and his father, preserving their lives, which is preserving the people of Israel. These are the 12 tribes. These brothers are the leaders of the tribes of Israel that will come out of them. And so clearly God is using what happened, this horrible thing that happened, and he turns it so that he will accomplish what God wants to accomplish and bring himself glory, which ultimately leads to the coming of Jesus Christ and the birth of our Savior and his life, death, resurrection. Right? So God uses that sin to, because he uses everything. This is Romans 8:28. That God takes all things and works them for good. He creates the good out of it. He doesn't then thereby say, well, what happened was good. He's not saying that. He's saying, but how I make it, how I turn it becomes good. Good comes out of this. And that's where Joseph has landed. So he says, I'm forgiving you. There's grace here. So you don't have to continue to be angry with yourselves, and you don't have to continue to be grieved. Because I've found a way to forgive you, and God has worked in my life to see that he is going to bring good out of this. It's a crazy way to think about the world. It is a Christian way to think about the world. That God can take, we see things zero sum, right? It's either good or it's bad, and which is true. There's good and there's bad. But we sometimes think, well, if it's bad, then it's always bad and it can never be right. But God looks at it and says, no, I can take that bad and I can flip it. I can bring myself glory out of that. I can still accomplish my purposes through that. Not endorsing the bad, but using the results of that to bring about his will. It's a great story. Obviously, you got to read the whole thing, right? Thanks for watching. I hope that's helped. God bless you for teaching, especially you who are Sunday school teachers, life group teachers, small group, whatever you'll call it. Appreciate you so much, and praying for you that God will work through your life and work through your teaching. Be sure and subscribe, like, comment, share it with somebody else. One more week to go. We'll see you next week.